J'aimerais maintenant laisser la parole à Laurie Johnstone, ancienne présidente d'Athlète Can, qui offrira une brève présentation concernant athlete leadership. So, Laurie, and if you do have any real questions about Athletes Can, this is Laurie's 18th forum in a row, and this is our 18th forum. She just stole a good joke of mine. So welcome, Laurie.
Quand il a dit bref, oui ou non, on va c'est 10h30 quand on va finir. We're going to finish at 10:30, so I don't know if I'd call this a brief presentation, but my parts hopefully will be brief, and your parts and time for discussion hopefully will be a little longer. Good morning. I'm certainly happy to have the opportunity to facilitate the newest Athletes Can leadership module, the Athletes Rep Handbook. The concept of an athlete rep handbook or manual has certainly been around since the earliest days of Athletes Can. Very quickly, we wanted to equip athletes with kind of a toolkit. So this version will represent sort of the newest version and will soon be online. I'd like to touch on the concept of leadership just a little bit, and it has been argued that some people are born with the personality characteristics of a leader, but that they must be given the opportunity to have and have the interest in developing those traits to become a true champion of a cause. However, leadership as a personality trait we know is not necessarily true. I think we can all agree that leadership skills, I just have to move the stuff at my feet here that maybe I'm just not tall enough to get close. We can agree that leadership can be learned, that the skills are not necessarily taught in schools or in sport programs, but it's certainly one of our main focuses here is to develop and improve our leadership skills. Leaders are agents of change, and there are inherent kind of risks that are associated with kind of taking on that challenge. And there's a quote, Machiavelli, the Prince, that it should be borne in mind that there is nothing more difficult. Is someone pressing the, are we moving? I have it? Okay. Okay, there we go. It should be borne in mind that there's nothing more difficult to arrange, more doubtful of success, and more dangerous to carry through than instigating changes. The innovator makes enemies of all those who prospered under the old order, and only lukewarm support is forthcoming from those who would prosper under him or her. Machiavelli didn't say that, I did. Their support is lukewarm, partly for fear of their adversaries, who have the existing laws on their side, and partly men and women are incredulous, never really trusting new things until they have tested them by experience. Certainly in the earliest days of Athletes Can, this was what athlete leaders experienced, and perhaps still to this day in some organizations, and that it's still the case. From a different perspective, and hopefully in a more aspirational light, I'd like to read you a quote from, and I hope I'm saying it right, Lao Tzu. Go to the people, learn from them, live with them. Start with what they know. Build with what they have. The best leaders, when the job is done, when the task is accomplished, the people will say, we have done it ourselves. So hopefully that's a little more positive and aspirational. And certainly what we hope that we are doing at Athletes Can. By being here this weekend, you are part of a change or a movement towards this continuing journey towards athlete-centered sport. And I have the feeling that most of us don't back down from a challenge. You're athlete leaders from over 50 sports in Canada. So look around at your peers and feel good that you're part of this mission that we're embarking on. And really, it truly is a collective adventure that we're taking. So before we can talk about what athlete representation is and why it's important, let's explore the term athlete-centered sport. So it can be defined in a number of ways, and from the earliest days, we said that athletes would no longer be sort of the subjects of, but rather active participants in the processes, the discussions, the decisions that impact on us in high-performance sport. And there are a number of attributes that we can talk about. So we'll briefly go through these. So accountability. A sports system needs to be accountable to its consumers, that's us, the athletes, not just us, but predominantly us, and it needs to be accountable to all members of sport organizations. So it's a key factor, being accountable. Mutual respect, that athletes will learn to value and respect themselves and others through having the opportunity to exercise control over their own lives and their own actions and interacting in respectful ways with others. Empowerment, we need to be empowered. We need to provide opportunities for athletes to develop leadership and decision-making skills. And the best way is to encourage athletes to develop and exercise their full range of abilities so that you become more competent and you're empowered. Equity, fairness, and athlete rights, and this one we all know is so important. Athletes know that training and competitive opportunities should be accessible, inclusive, and equitable. Athletes know that athlete agreements must be fair, understood by all parties, and never signed under duress. Excellence. We definitely know about this one. In an athlete-centered system, athletes are able to pursue and demonstrate athletic excellence because adequate facilities, qualified coaches, appropriate development and competitive opportunities, and support networks exist. So we're trying to create that ideal system so that we thrive and not just survive in sport. There's an extended responsibility in an athlete-centered sport system so that the transition from a training and competitive athletic world to post-competitive life is easier. We know that it's a difficult transition. Show of hands, how many athletes here are active right now? Wow. And how many have now transitioned and are in their post-career? Okay, so it's about a 2/3 to 1/3 split. The sports system has to recognize the long-term impact that it has on an athlete's life, and whether that's that you have a delayed start in the workforce, that your education extends over a longer period of time because you're trying to balance school and sport. You may be waiting to start a family, or you may be trying to juggle a whole bunch of different things. You're taking on a mortgage perhaps later in life. You're not starting RSPs as early. So there's a whole bunch of different ways outside of just sport that we need to recognize that extended responsibility, and how does the commitment to sport, what happens after sport? And decisions have to be made with appropriate consideration of the long-term consequences for athletes. Athletes' health, that the health of athletes has to be safeguarded. Sport must contribute to overall health and well-being for all participants. We recognize there's risk in sport, and many of us probably live with injuries and pain, and some of us were feeling that at yoga this morning. I certainly was. But we know that we have to the best of our ability and to the best of the ability of sport, recognizing the risk, safeguard athletes' health. Informed participation in an athlete-centered system, the athlete is given choices and kept aware of potential consequences and trade-offs. So it's informed decision-making, informed participation. Mutual support, athletes and others in the sport system must work together to meet objectives and solve problems. And rights, we know that this one's important. The rights of athletes must be clearly defined and mutually agreed upon. Mutually agreed upon. What does that mean? Well, both athletes and the sport organization leaders should develop and agree on the rights involved, over and above what's legal. And the rights that are agreed upon need to be safeguarded through policies, procedures, and organizational values. We've seen many times where someone will say, well, our high-performance director, they get it, that's great. What if they move on? If it's not within the processes and the policies of your organization, it can so quickly change when there is a management or a personality change. So how many people think that their sport is athlete-centered? Show of hands. Okay, so we still have a lot of work to do. I would say, quite frankly, there's ebbs and flows. There was a time in the early days when a lot of athletes were angry and frustrated, and we've moved a long way from athletes maybe having some of the same concerns, but that show of hands clearly shows you that the work is far from over. And whether the concerns have changed or whether they're the same concerns, we know that we have a lot to do, so we're still very relevant. There's certain questions we can ask to evaluate whether our sports are or are not athlete-centered. So we're going to just talk about some of those briefly. Here are some of the things you can be asking yourself. If you didn't raise your hand because you're not sure, let's look at this list. So is your sport experience positive for you and your teammates? Do most athletes stay involved after retirement? That could be on a committee, official, of some sort, volunteering, coaching, etc., possibly making their living through equipment, some kind of a job associated with it after. Does the system enable you and your teammates to achieve your full potential? Do you and your teammates receive quality coaching and technical support? Do you have access to appropriate training and competitive opportunities? Do you and your teammates compete with the spirit of sport and fair play? Does the system have a positive impact on developing the following characteristics through the long-term athlete development process from grassroots to high performance? Technical skills. Maybe this is on the next one. Technical skills, self-knowledge and self-esteem, moral integrity, leadership skills, teamwork, and respect for others. If, in your head when we were going through this list, you answered no to any of these questions, although your NSO may be trying to ensure these things are happening, there is still a lot of work to do. And this is where athletes' representation comes in and why athlete reps are so important. Within the sport funding accountability framework, NSOs are held accountable to expectations defined by Sport Canada to receive funding. And it's Annex A14, which addresses athlete-centeredness. We'll read it because it's important that you know that NSOs are supposed to be accountable to this standard. NSOs must demonstrate their formal commitment to athlete-centeredness, where athletes are treated fairly and have substantive opportunities to be involved in decisions which affect them. This commitment to athlete-centeredness may be demonstrated in a number of ways, so we're not talking about a cookie-cutter approach here, either by reflecting it in the structure and organization of the NSO, and or making this commitment explicit in policies or other instruments, or by having a policy or other instrument that outlines and confirms this commitment. We also know that just having a policy isn't far enough if it's not being respected. So we may be able to have a check, but there still could be room to progress. So just an aside there. This also includes ensuring opportunities and mechanisms exist for national team athletes to be informed and to provide input into matters affecting them, particularly in the area of national team programming. NSOs must also provide national team athletes with access to due process. NSOs must provide to Sport Canada a copy of documentation demonstrating this commitment. So that is the standard of accountability that NSOs are being held to. And if in your opinion they are not, then it's really important that you are, or others who are athlete reps in your organization are able to work with your NSO so that they can meet this accountability, because that obviously will benefit you and your teammates. So how many of you are aware that your NSO is actively addressing these opportunities? Show of hands. Okay, well the good news is if you are here as an athlete representative through your NSO, they're at least making the effort. So there's probably some progress which we may or may not be aware of, and there could be specific issues where they're struggling, but they may definitely be positive in terms of their intent. So that may be a first step or one of many steps, and it kind of depends on where they are in that process. So we have a good idea of what athlete-centered sport ideally looks like, and we can all agree that athlete representation is essential to ensuring an effective athlete-centered sport system. So whether you're here as an elected athlete rep or have come to this weekend out of interest or to fill in for your current athlete rep, you're probably asking the question, how can I ensure my sport is athlete-centered and that my teammates are being given the appropriate knowledge and opportunity to influence decisions that affect us? And that's what we're aspiring to work on this morning. So the first thing you need to know, we're just going to briefly go over what is an athlete rep. So ask yourself the question, and we posed this at the orientation session last night as well, how much input, either directly or indirectly, do I have and do other athletes have into decisions that affect me? Are there ways for my voice to be heard when things are decided? Ensuring that there is a process for the opinions of athletes to be heard and acted upon is an important step in making sure your sport is focused on your needs and the athletes in general. And we believe that the most effective way is through this position. So an athlete rep is someone who speaks on behalf of athletes. They are current or retired national team athletes. So it's up to a sport to decide, or the athletes in fact to decide whether they're best represented by that athlete being current or retired. So there's certainly we're not saying it works better one way or the other. You will probably have stories to tell about how it works best in your sport. So either current or retired, selected or appointed by their teammates to represent the athlete voice within the sport, and in many instances for multiple levels, disciplines, and genders. Show of hands, how many of you have a rep, and not necessarily present today, but a rep for your male program and for your female program? Okay. So in some cases, when the disciplines are very different training venues, different competitive circuits, that's the case. In other cases, it's quite generic, and they choose to have one rep. Okay, so we're going to move into our first small group discussion, and in the next few minutes, we're going to take about 10 to 15 minutes for this exercise. You're going to, at your table, you have your buddy who is going to facilitate this discussion, and you're going to talk about the benefits of being an athlete rep, why you think someone would not want to be an athlete rep, and some of the characteristics or some of the, I think it's the ideal, what was the other part of it, the ideal, the third question? characteristics of an ideal athlete rep. All right, so on your mark, set, go. All right, that's a wrap. Can I draw your attention back up here for a minute? Just from surveying the room and just walking around, there were obviously some really intense conversations going around, so it was really interesting to see how engaged everyone. Probably a lot of good stories to tell. I'm going to just briefly outline some of the benefits that kind of your predecessors have shared, and then I'll ask if there's any additional ones that you guys have come up with that you share those. So benefits of being an athlete rep: affecting positive change, learning about your NSO and the Canadian High Performance Sports System. Number 3, educate people in your NSO about the current needs and status of the national team. 4, another benefit is educating your teammates about your NSO and the high performance sports system. Developing effective communication and presentation skills. Building your career, being able to put it on your resume. Building your network, meeting other athlete reps through conferences, workshops, and etc., so that you can exchange ideas and network. Earn respect for your abilities outside sport, develop leadership skills both on and off the field of play, and communicate opportunities to give back for you and your teammates that you've learned about by getting involved. So those are some. If anyone would like to volunteer others that your group has come up with in terms of a benefit of being an athlete rep, I just ask that you use the mics that are available. So you have a quick opportunity. If there were any additional, or does that pretty much cover it? Okay, so it looks like it's a pretty comprehensive list. Oh, Alex. Yeah, Alex. Eric?
I mean, these benefits really are mostly what, is that on? Most of those benefits were speaking specifically to the athlete, but one of the, we talked a little bit about benefits to the sport, and the big one that came up is initiating change. And lots of times it's not something that the board would realize that there's a change that's needed, or that the coaches might not recognize the same issue that the athletes would. So that was the big theme, was initiating that change.
Okay.
As that athlete rep.
Excellent.
And if we're going to have a lot of people speaking at mics, if you could say your name and your sport when you come up to the mic. Eric Peterson from diving over there. I'm Andrew from tennis. It's just an easier way to get to know each other since we're meeting so many people this weekend.
Okay, so if there are no other ones, then I'm going to ask that we cue a video. Do we have to do anything with this? Nope.
I'm too weak, too slow, too big. I ate too much for breakfast. Got a headache. It's raining. My dog is sick. I can't right now. I'm not inspired. Makes me smell bad. I'm allergic to stuff. I'm fat. I'm thin. It's too hot. I'm not right. I've got shin splints, headache. I'm distracted. I'm exerting myself too much. I'd love to really, but I can't. I just can't. My favorite show is on. I got a case of the Mondays, the Tuesdays, the Wednesdays. I don't want to do this. I'm gonna do something else. After New Year's. Next week. Might make a mistake. Got homework. I feel bloated. I have gas. I got a hot date. My coach hates me. Mom won't let me. I bruise easily. It's too dark. It's too cold. My blister hurts. This is dangerous. Sorry, I don't have a bike. I didn't get enough sleep. My tummy hurts. It's not in my jeans. I don't want to look all tired out. I need a better coach. I don't like getting tackled. I have a stomach ache. I'm not the athletic type. I want to get sweaty. I have better things to do. I don't want to slow you down. I have to do this as soon as I get a promotion. I think I'll sit this one out. And my feet hurt.
Okay, no excuses. But why do most athletes say that they don't want to be an athlete rep? So barriers and misconceptions. I don't have time. I don't like the politics. I'm not interested. It's too stressful. I don't feel as though I have the skills to do it. I just want to focus on my sport. I don't want to be controversial, or I don't want to piss anyone off. I don't want the responsibility, and it's too much work. Now, some of those are legitimate, and it's not to take away from a person's right to be able to say that it doesn't fit for their life at a particular time. But there is always an excuse if you want one. So I'm just curious if you were able to come up with any other ones that the group talked about in terms of reasons why people don't want to be an athlete rep. Louis?
Georgina Wheatcroft curling. One of the people in our group said you get to see the disorganization within your organization. So, sometimes ignorance is bliss. That's what maybe.
That's a good one.
Is this already on? Do I have to
I believe
push
so.
something? Jared McLeod, track or athletics. We had getting pulled in different directions, obviously by your board, your NSO, the other athletes, stuff like that, and then just confusion as to what's expected of you, what you do, stuff like that, or not even knowing that the opportunities are out there. Not hearing about it, not reading the emails, stuff like that. So.
Okay.
Hi, Josh Vandervies, Bocce, and we identified a barrier. We identified language as being a barrier, and that an athlete rep really must speak English in Canada to be an effective rep. It's helpful to be bilingual, but speaking French only can be a barrier.
Good one.
Hello, Ryan Ferguson, Life Saving. A barrier I found is just the list of requirements to become an athlete rep through the NSO. I found that was a giant barrier. I think only 2 or 3 athletes in our society were able to apply and meet the requirements. Especially the term, you had to sign on for a 4-year term minimum, which I think is an enormous time commitment.
Wow.
So I think that's a huge barrier, whatever the requirements are that your NSO makes, to sort of make it a difficult time for an athlete to become that rep.
Okay. Yeah.
Christian Vardy from Ringette, and for us, we don't even have an athlete rep right now, so the biggest thing, and our former one is not a national team athlete, we never have had one, so the biggest thing is kind of you don't want to be affecting change and putting your own position within a really small community kind of in jeopardy, especially in a national program. So.
These are all really good points.
I don't need it this low. Okay, Nicole Forrester, athletics. Our group had a couple of things that were identified. One was the misconception of not being able to affect change. So that belief that you're there, but you're an armchair athlete as opposed to being able to be involved and having your opinions listened to, as well as maybe being apathetic. Some athletes might just have an indifferent feeling about it until like maybe an issue occurs that affects them. And then one really good point was feeling like blackballed if you spoke up. So you're an athlete rep, and if you're a current athlete who's still competing, that by bringing issues forward that you might then be on the outs with your NSO.
Perfect.
That's my man voice for the day.
So obviously there are a lot of barriers, and when I spoke earlier about agreeing to take on the mission, you really are, and we recognize there are kind of inherent risks, whether because you're concerned about your position, whether you're being pulled in different directions, whether you're concerned that you meet some crazy standards. So this is where athletes definitely need to be able to impact and define what works for them, for you, in terms of who can represent you. So the example being given of an NSO having very restrictive kind of guidelines about who can serve, that'd be a perfect project to try to make changes, and so that the position is better representative of what the athletes can actually do. So that would be a really neat project. So we're going to talk about some keys to being an effective athlete representative, and we all know that we play crucial and very critical roles in terms of being the conduit between whether you're still an active athlete and other active athletes and the decision makers in your sport. And you help athletes to become part of that decision-making circle. And not everyone will want to be involved in their sport outside of training and competition. And it's the job of the athlete representatives, the athlete leaders, to let their teammates know that you're willing to kind of wear that, you're going to wear the armor and you're going to be that voice to the table. And you're going to be the negotiator, in a sense, to help resolve issues that are important. And basically, it's because someone has to do it. So there can be lots of excuses, but at the end of the day, to better our own lives and the lives of our teammates and for the betterment of our sport, we really do need to kind of come to the line. So the role We recognize that it's challenging, and sometimes it's juggling your personal needs with that of your teammates, and it's a tough thing to do, so we really respect that. But at the same time, to best serve both your own interests and that of your teammates, you need their support and respect and understanding of the position you've accepted. So the point raised about being confused about what the expectations are, we're going to try and clarify some of that. So some tips, you want to determine what your mandate is. Who do you represent? What do those people want you to do? And understand how to be an effective advocate to address those issues. You want to establish strong and continuous lines of communication between between yourself and those you represent, other board and other committee members, and with association staff. And I raised briefly last night, just think back for a moment, hit the rewind button, 1992, 1993, when athletes were first coming together in this association. We didn't use the web. We didn't have emails, Twitter, Facebook. We thought it was really cool that we could fax people. So quick time warp there. So establishing communication lines, cell phones now. So establishing quick communication lines in 2010 and beyond is a completely different story than when we were tasked with doing this in the early days. So just conveying information, communicating, having that dialogue is so much easier. We can't use the excuse of not having the technology. We need to learn and understand how our organizations work, which are the committees where decisions are made, and how do athletes become part of the decision-making processes. So it's not the same in every sport. Sometimes there's very clear lines. Athletes have positions on boards. There's an athletes' council. In other cases, there isn't. So it's understanding what works in your sport, even if you have to kind of draw that map. Learn about the Canadian sport system and how your peers in all sport fit in with that framework. And that's a role athletes can helps to provide, because we don't want you to have to reinvent the wheel every time there's a new athlete rep. We understand how that system works, and hopefully we can provide that quick snapshot so that you can get yourself situated in terms of where everybody fits. Know the policies and the issues in your organization, especially those that affect high performance, coaching programs, and personnel. This next one's really important. When you are there, attend the meetings and be prepared. So some organizations have used the fact, well, we had an athletes rep, we had an athletes council, they couldn't show up because they were at training camps or competitions. Well, some of that has to rest on the NSO shoulders of, why are you scheduling things when athletes aren't available? And part of that has to rest with athletes working to kind of maybe have a flexible representation model, so that if some athletes are away or their competitive schedule isn't allowing them to be at meetings, maybe there's more than one, and you have a co-partner, a co-representative who is able to attend those meetings when you're not able. So there's responsibility on both parties to try to make this work. Read the pre-meeting materials. Talk to other committee members. It's really hard to contribute if you do not attend prepared to discuss the issues. So you have to do your homework. Likewise, you have to follow up and do what you've been asked to do promptly and well. Report on meetings to those you represent and let them know what's happening before it happens, if at all possible. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you're given 24 hours to respond to something and you're rushed, you have to rush others. That's the context. It'd be great if it wasn't. In other times, whenever possible, when you have the time so people can take the time to reflect and provide feedback, you want to do that. So it's just trying to be timely. Learn about all sides of an issue by asking questions, discussing the situation, and listening. We so often want to bring our position, make sure everybody understands us. We also need to make sure we understand others' positions. That makes us better able to negotiate and find the common ground. Have a plan. We have a sport plan. We have our plan for our training and our competition generally. We also need a plan as an athlete representative. If you see something that you and those you represent think is not right, be prepared with a plan to change it. So the example I brought up was, is a 4-year term for an athlete representative, is that ideal or something that you like? Well, if we don't, there's a perfect project to be able to say, okay, I'm going to develop a plan to how to change that within my organization. Clearly identify the problem and offer paths, plural, to solutions. It may not be plan A. It might be plan B or plan C that will help you to finally arrive at a solution that works for all the parties. So kind of have your options open. What's your line in the sand that you're not willing to cross? What are the non-negotiables? But what are the negotiables, and how can you work to find that common ground? Don't be afraid to speak up or ask questions when you do not understand. You may feel stupid, but you cannot be effective without understanding. And chances are someone else has the same question anyway. And we know there are no stupid questions, right? I mean, basically, and this is a perfect environment to practice that skill of saying, I didn't quite get that. What do you mean? Because this is a room where hopefully we all are going to accept that with the intent of educating each other. When you're knowledgeable, be sure of yourself. Athletes live in the sports system. We understand how it really works, not just how it's supposed to work. And when you come to that table, wherever that table is, as a decision maker or as a contributor to the process, have confidence that you are representing your teammates. Make sure you've done the process so that you can say you're representing your teammates, but recognize that you are competent and knowledgeable and empowered to be there. And remember that a stronger sports system really does start with you. Oops. So the membership has been approached to provide feedback about resources to help aid in the athlete representation, and the following areas were identified. So the athlete rep tools, kind of a checklist of resources for an athlete rep, a job description. In terms of the orientation, an organizational structure for the NSO, so kind of creating that map, a checklist of information to review and discuss with outgoing athlete reps, so a succession process, questions and information to discuss with your national sport organization, a summary of documents to review before the first meeting with your NSO or athletes, and a sample athlete rep orientation plan. As well, athletes wanted communication tools, so that could be templates for email communication, such as that, introduction email. I'm your new athlete rep. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I propose we do it. Collecting and managing contact details. So how do you keep up with the team roster? And in some sports that's fairly easy. In other sports that could involve hundreds of people in many different disciplines. And systems for effective two-way communication. Navigating the NSO and athlete rep relationship, there were things like, what are some of the issues that we may face? So what have others done when they've had to deal with these issues before us? Who are the key players? And how do you deal with supporters? How do you increase your number of supporters? And how do you deal with your saboteurs? Leveraging your influence. How do we leverage our influence? Creating a positive environment. And avoiding the us versus them dynamic. So these were some of the things that that athletes have said that they are looking for to be able to improve their skills as athlete reps. We'd like to do another small group discussion where you're going to be answering the question. What's going to happen with this is there's been an inventory compiled with the information that's gathered today. They're going to look to kind of revise and adapt what's existing and what's needed in order to prepare a more effective athlete rep toolkit. So in small groups, we are going to look at what tools and resources are you looking for to help you navigate and build your NSO athlete relationships? Are there any gaps in communication, and how can we help you address them? And each athlete can share successes or important lessons learned, challenges, or opportunities when dealing with your NSO. So we're going to take, we have about 10 minutes for this session. I realize it's a really short time frame, but if we could just proceed, and these conversations can definitely continue on in hallways and in the evening and that sort of thing as well. So please go. Okay, I'd like to draw your attention back. So I'm just quickly going to flip through. So your predecessors at previous forums had provided some feedback, I believe it was last year, on the kinds of tools that they were looking for. And so we were tasked today to talk about whether there were additional resources, different tools, what else do you need, or does this cover it? So just to remind you of the list, what we'd like to know now from your tables, and we just have a few minutes for this part, and then we're going to go into some success stories about athletes' councils. Do you have additional, from your conversations, do you have additional tools? And the mentors at the tables are going to be submitting that information, so it's not lost if you don't share it. But do you have some you'd like to share? Anyone? So I'm asking, it's just a combination. Is there anything from your discussion that you would really like to bring to the group?
I'm Jen. I'm from sailing. Some of the points that we outlined were facilitating communication. So how to navigate your NSO, who exactly is responsible for what, so you know who to ask the questions to, and communicating the resources for athletes. I mean, aside from the checks that you get in the mail, there's so much that you're entitled to, but often we don't know what that is until halfway through the season because it hasn't been decided or it hasn't been communicated. And as well, your roles and responsibilities as an athlete. So your code of ethics should all be in one document.
Okay, excellent.
I'm Caleb from Judo, and just one of the successes we've had at Judo recently is we've instigated a coach review process. After, here's for the first time after our World Championships, we had a review of both coaches and support staff in terms of what we liked and what we found lacking. And, well, that's basically one of the successes.
Fantastic.
I'm Rosanna from water polo, and a couple things we talked about was that when you have an athlete rep and their term finishes, if there could be some sort of mentorship from a previous rep to a new rep so that there's not this period of no knowledge for the new rep, and they may bring forth a problem or a question that has already been addressed, or so just that they can be brought up to speed more quickly, and that perhaps there could be a staggering between reps so that the new ones are learning before the old ones leave. And then there was a couple other things. Oh yeah, and even just, I had to admit to my group that like a month ago I didn't know what NSO meant or PSO, so just terminology perhaps, and now I know. And was that it?
Okay.
Yeah, so just simple things too. And even I think it was Ryan was saying in sort of like agreements or just information, sometimes it helps if it's in plain English, that there could, or in French, or if there could be a Cole's notes rather than just like, this
legalese,
intense vocabulary. Thanks.
Excellent. Those are
Hi, Tom Hall from Canoe Kayak. We came up with a tool, or we would like a tool that would be a way to hold the NSOs accountable. So basically information on what certain things should look like, what does an appeal process look like, or what does an appeal look like in the athlete agreement and stuff like that. And is there a way that we can compare what we currently have in an NSO to what would ideally be the best way to do that type of thing?
Just to clarify, so is it the concept of a report card? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, exactly.
Athletes Can did embark on that project at an earlier time, and then at that time it was, organizations still need a lot of education before they're being held accountable. Well, that's a good 10 or 12 or maybe even 13 years ago. So if we're not ready for that kind of accountability now, when will we be?
Yeah.
So that would be a really interesting
Yeah,
project.
a report card is the
to look
perfect
at
way to
again.
put it. Thank you. Very succinct.
Or an assessment tool.
Aaron Cadu, Beach Volleyball, and one of the things that we were talking about is we have all these questions all the time constantly coming up about legal issues or whatever it is creating a person maybe within Athletes Can that's a liaison, like a simple email or whatever of someone of your stature would know all these questions, right? We can go through all these policies, and there's all this information on the websites about, and the guys with sport law too, but someone or a group of people that you can go and quickly email and say, hey, what direction should I go in this area? And I think that's the biggest key thing because it becomes overwhelming when you're really trying to figure things out. So.
One of the ones that was brought up from another group was the importance of maybe developing some case histories or scenarios, so some stories that would tell the successes or the challenges and how people overcame them. So that would be a really interesting project as well. And we just need to say that every single one of us is accessible, and hopefully we'll have our contact information. And if you have a question or you have a concern that you share and that you want to work on or get some feedback from someone, every single person at Athletes Can, like all of us as reps and past reps and alumni, we're a phone call or an email away. So just to follow up on that, that hopefully that's part of building this network. Okay, so we're going to thank you for all of those, and we will be sure to get the notes and build on this list, adapt or modify or create the tools that you need, and then come back to you with those tools. We're going to shift gears now. The final phase of our session is going to cover athletes' councils. And so this is part of building your toolkit and hopefully telling some success stories. So athletes' councils, why are they important? Does your sport need one? What do they do? How do you start one? And how does an athletes' council stay engaged? Sometimes your performances don't speak for themselves. And for whatever reason, you may have been left off a team. You may have been forced to compete under conditions you think were unsafe. You lost your carding. You think that's unfair. Discipline was taken that you don't think was fair. Some of these events need never have happened that way if you had been part of, or an athlete or athletes had been part of the decision-making process. Athletes at the national level should have a process in place to communicate and share knowledge among athletes in the sport. One structure that has proven very successful in a number of sports has been the creation of a sport-specific athletes council. And in some cases, they've been successful for a period of time, and then certain athletes leave that have championed it, and they are no longer successful, or they disband, and then they are rebuilt. So but in general, athletes councils have been an effective mechanism. Formalizing effective communication and representation at decision-making tables is an effective way to have the athlete voice front and center. And we've included an example of an athletes council terms of reference for your reference, and the mentors are going, your buddies are going to hand those out. And now I'd like to ask Eric Peterson, who's the Vice President of Athletes Can Board of Directors, to discuss his experience in creating an athletes council. And diving is one of the sports that has had a long history of athletes councils in their sport, but he'll be able to speak more to that. And then we'll move into a final question and answer period. So Eric, would you join us?
Good morning. I'll just also start by maybe giving a little caveat. It's always an ongoing process in developing the athlete roles, in developing what that council looks like. We just did a renewal of our terms of reference of the mandate about a year ago. We have 2 new members of our athlete council here now that I've retired, Melanie Rinaldi and Ruben Ross. Is Ruben here? There he is. So part of this is talking about the things that we've tried to accomplish, things that I've tried to accomplish as the past diving athlete chair, and passing on information, hopefully doing it in an effective way for Melanie and Ruben. The documents actually that you have here in front of you are specifically, it's not the mandate of our council, it's actually one of the deliverables, which I think is most important and where we've been most effective, is providing essentially an annual athletes report that gets published to all of our membership at our AGM. So at the Diving Canada AGM, all of the provincial sport organizations, the officials, the coaches, and the athletes each prepare a look back on the year in the sport, and that information is published to the entire group at the AGM. And what it really does is it provides communication that goes directly to the board and membership from those implicated in the sport in different ways. So what I've prepared here are the Diving Canada athlete reports that we published 2005, 2006, and 2007. So we're kind of bearing all here in terms of what's been happening in diving, and I think that this is a very, very strong example of transparency, and it really does hold people very accountable for what's happening in the sport. And I wanted, when I started writing this as the chair of the Diving Athlete Council, there's certain principles in mind that discussing with the other athletes that we wanted to carry forward. So we've prepared this. One document you have here, it's 2 pages, it says at the top, Annual DPC Athletes Committee Report Guidelines. DPC stands for Diving Plongeon Quebec. Diving Plongeon Canada. Quebec with a C. So maybe I'll just actually walk through this report. I think this speaks to some of the comments that were raised about, the mentorship. Or is there a question? Yeah, it should have come out to each table. Okay, so the first document I want to look at is it's a single page at the top, Annual DPC Athletes Committee Report Guidelines. Really, what this outlines is the purpose of the report. So this is something that goes to the AGM, to all coaches, officials, staff, provincial section heads. Really, what this report is, it's an opportunity once a year to provide feedback that is seen by the entire Diving Canada membership. As a result of this report, there's actually been some very significant changes in the programming that's been delivered within the sport that has come as a result of this feedback, where that initiation for change is really taken on by the board as a result of the reports. There's also another aspect of this here under the heading representation. It's not an easy thing putting together this report, as I think Melanie can attest to, and Ruben is about to learn. Welcome, Ruben. Welcome. And which, when I stepped away, I was involved supporting the athletes that were reporting it at the time for this couple of years. But you also have to, when you build that representation, you have to build it in a way that you can then step back and still have that process being done effectively, because you as an individual can only take on so much. So it's really, in this document, I wanted to emphasize the fact that it is a responsibility to take on that report and do the best job possible. So the outline of the report on the back, the second page here, and this will be evident when we look at the report specifically. Usually just there's a brief introduction on what's happened over the past year. So there's a single document, page 2 of 2. So it says Athlete Committee Report Guidelines at the top of the document, and outline a report. So really, this is the structure that we've followed in the reports that have been very effective. Usually just an introductory paragraph commenting on, the major successes of the year. It might be, and it's really just a warm, friendly, hey, this is 2010. In this report, we're going to be touching on Commonwealth Games. It was a big year in sport in general in Canada with Vancouver 2010, and we're looking forward to building on the next year. A review of the previous year's recommendations. So this is something, one document here at the very top, it says 2005 DPC Athletes Committee Report. This was the first year that I provided the report. There had been reports in the past. So this didn't have a review of the previous year's comments. So if you as the athletes reps haven't generated a report like this, your first report will probably look something like this, where you don't have recommendations from a previous year to look back on. But if you take a look at the second document, 2005-2006, the first header there after the introductory paragraph is looking back from 2004-2005 to 2005-2006. And I think it's important to do, once this gets going and you have a report that you can look back on the previous year, it gets easier and easier to do. Basically, we had 3 big asks in 2005. One was we didn't ever have any national team training camps. There were training camps for teams that made a competition. So if you made a world championships, there'd be a world championship team training camp prior to going to the competition. But there was never a time where all the athletes got together outside of the competition season to work with other coaches, to work with their teammates, to maybe develop teammates for synchro, which has become a really big event. So there's examples in pairs in other events where if you have athletes across the country in different areas that never train together, how do you develop a partnership? Whether it's two-man rowing, or I don't know, tennis, or various examples. So one big thing was to ask for a training camp. Another thing was we had Speedo outfitting from 1982, which was horrific stuff to train in. I'm sure you guys all know the tracksuits that crinkle when you walk. Terrible stuff to wear on a pool deck. And that was an issue. Every year they gave us the same pair of pants that we had, 5 pairs of already. And it's like, look, this just doesn't cut it on the international stage, and people aren't using the equipment. We don't look like a team when we're traveling internationally. It seems like a really, menial thing, and you say, really, that's an issue that needs to be addressed as a, so that we can have better performance. Oh, I've got 10 minutes. I'm going way over. But the point was, yeah, it does, because all of a sudden we walk on the deck and we're all in gear that everyone's wearing, and we have a presence on the deck, and that creates unity, and that creates a feeling of team, and it has a presence to the other teams, and I think that does have an impact on performance. So what we did is we made these strong recommendations. Then every year we would go back and review those recommendations. And for the first couple of years, those recommendations weren't heeded, and it was just a reminder to the membership: here's something we identified that's important. This wasn't addressed. We feel that it is important, and here's the new issues that we've faced. We also, when those changes were made, gave a lot of credit, saying, thank you, this is something that's had a very positive impact. We now have a physio that's traveling with us on all competitions, and this is how it's had a positive impact. So, keeping in mind that the board members are a step away from the action, and it's an opportunity for them to see what's happening on the ground and how effective the organization, the staff, the coaches are in driving those things forward. So, as well as providing an opportunity to identify opportunities to improve the sport, it's been important and for us to recognize the changes that have been made, so that process continues. Then finally, there's a review of key events. How do things go at the major competitions? Were there any major issues? There are cases where people were, got on a flight to the wrong part of the world, or major stopovers that had a negative impact. And then we always do a review of the Athletes Can Forum. Here's the major issues that were addressed. That's communication both to the athletes and to the broader organization to understand what happens over this weekend and what are the things that are, that are being brought up by Sport Canada that that are being reviewed. That are, what are the developments on the podium, and what was the impression of the athletes? A bit broader perspective. And then finally, always saying thanks for the opportunity to provide that feedback. So again, the tone of the report being very respectful and a collaborative tone, even though maybe might be a little bit more adversarial at times, always showing that taking the higher road with the tone of that report. One of the biggest challenges in writing this report is getting the feedback from the athletes, and so we've done that typically through email, but lots of times it's a follow-up with a phone call, asking very specific questions. How do you feel about these specific items? So a combination of being open-ended as well as pointed in getting feedback from the athletes. Maybe having a champion at a specific club saying, hey, I need, haven't heard from anybody on the West Coast. Can you make sure that we get feedback from the club in Victoria, for example? So it definitely takes some time. I think it's effective to have, 2 or 3 people helping to write the report. Maybe giving one person responsibility for, can you write a section on the junior nationals? How did that go? Which is also part of the development of other reps, so that they've been involved with the report, so that it's not as daunting of a task to take it on when you're no longer there as athlete rep. So that's a lot of, threw a lot at you. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions. Is there anyone else here that does provide a report like this to their general membership? So we have 1, 2, hockey, 3, swimming does, lawn bowls, which is fantastic. This is really something that we should have from every single athlete rep in every single sport. It goes a long way also to promoting. We talk about let's have an athlete voice, but if we don't have a deliverable, then if we don't have a deliverable in that, then the athlete voice is jumping up and down, shouting and sometimes not being heard. Question?
More of a comment.
Can you come to the mic?
And name and sport, please.
Ryan Blake, freestyle skiing. I think the template model that you're using is really important. We're trying to develop a template as well for the international commission I'm on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that would be good is whether it's the template you've proposed or something that Athlete Can develops or elsewhere, that there's some consistency across the sports. So then once those reports are being generated, and there's going to be some lag, some athletes won't immediately start, or not everyone will be doing them. But once all of the athlete reps are hopefully doing them, you can kind of compile them all together, and I can imagine that being almost like a report on sport from the athlete's perspective, athlete reps across the board. That would be very helpful to see.
Actually, that's a great point. If we can use those, that would be a great way for Athletes Can as a whole to see what's going on in the different sports. So I guess that's, it's something that I hadn't really considered is, this Diving Canada report doesn't come back to Athletes Can, but maybe they should from all of the, which I think is a little bit what you're suggesting.
Yeah, and actually I did have a question. So once you do
You might as well just stay there for a while.
Ryan Blay, Aerials.
Yeah.
So when you have this report, who disseminates it for you? Is it on you to get it in front of as many eyes as you can, or does your association help you out? And I guess that begs the question: if you were to submit it to Athletes Can, would they sort of help spread that news as well, especially if you have success stories?
Right. So this actually, I get a deadline, or Melanie and Ruben are facing a deadline right now from the NSO saying, "Hey guys, where's your athletes report? We're going to need that material because it's going to be going out to all the AGM attendees, and we also need to publish it on the website." So Diving Canada actually publishes on the website AGM materials, coaches report, officials report, athletes report. So it's very, very transparent, and so it takes a little bit of work to definitely get to that point, and it would probably be more driven by the athletes reps saying, "Here's a report. I want to get this out to the board members." So knowing when your AGM is for your sport, being at your AGM as the athlete rep, and if the AGM conflicts with competition schedules and whatnot, that's something else that probably should be addressed. It probably doesn't conflict with competition schedules because coaches need to be there as well. But as the athlete rep, to be at the AGM, to know what's going on, to be visible to the board members and recognize that that athlete rep role is being taken on seriously. With Diving Canada, we have a budgetary commitment by them to fund, I believe it's 2 athlete reps to the AGM. So that's, there's a few key asks, and so that's probably a follow-up item. If someone from the board or staff can make a note of that, is for the athlete reps to make a request to the NSO to fund an athlete rep to your AGM. So that you can be present, so that this can be delivered. So in addition to this being circulated and put on the website, it is something that the athlete rep is asked to speak to specifically at the AGM. What are the key things in sport? And again, it always has to be done in an environment of respect and in the right manner in order for it to land effectively. But if there's key issues, then the membership and the board of directors definitely need to hear about it. Does that answer your question? Did I get to it? Other questions? Comments? Thoughts? Sure.
Brian John Swimming. I guess my concern is that because our constituency is rather large and it goes across the country, is getting effective feedback from all the swimmers.
Right.
And I know I in particular have a problem because I don't speak French, so it's hard to get a lot of feedback from the Quebec swimmers. But then as well, we're on our athletes council, we're not very well represented all the way across the board. So I find it challenging to get effective feedback so that I can ensure that whatever the needs are, that I voice those properly.
Right.
And I know you have sort of the same problems as I do, and so what do you do in terms of combating that?
I find it's, you can probably only effectively communicate with 4, maybe 5 people. If you send an email out to 40 people, first of all, they're not all going to respond. So that is one approach. But it can be, sending it out to the broad group, but then having a few people specifically to champion that feedback. So if you get, Benoit, to be responsible and get him to step up to the plate and say, yeah, I will get you feedback, even if it's just my own opinion. And so at least if you can, if you can share the task, share the task, sample the population, make other people responsible for a specific aspect. Maybe you have someone saying, again, example of a junior nationals, maybe you weren't at a specific competition, you find somebody that that you can count on and say, can you provide me some feedback on this? And even if it's a cursory, whatever, everything was great. Then you've looked at it and it gives the opportunity for that feedback.
Just to add one piece to that, in the days of Twitter and Facebook and everything else, you can basically compile feedback almost instantaneously as people are reporting from their experiences. So we're at a time and place where we can, and I mean, you can be upfront about saying, well, some of my feedback comes from my teammates' Twitters and blogs and etc. But there are many different ways that we could sample our memberships.
I think on that note, if there are successes, this is something we can follow up on forum next year. It'd be great to come back to forum. Hey, we've got 20 people in here now that are writing these reports, and let's share the success stories and challenges that were faced at next year's forum. Right.
Yeah, sorry, Ryan again. I just wanted to add to your comment of leveraging new technologies, Facebook and Twitter. Those are just the tools that are popular now. But the literacy level for most athlete reps is going to be pretty high in those technologies. And I find that not everyone, but most people are using them. Some athlete reps are using them to communicate or this or that, but it's happening all in these different silos and it's not organized. And I'm a big fan of creating hubs where you can essentially archive these communications, whether through blogs or forum discussions. And I don't see that happening. So one of the things I did for my athlete commission for FIS was created, I just used one of the free technologies out there. It's essentially a white label Facebook. It was a social network, and we have forum pages and this and that, encouraging our members to use them so that it leads to the succession planning too, that when the new group comes in, they can just, read the record. It's there and it's very transparent. But I've been finding that there's, even within Canada, and more so if you talk about internationally, there's athletes that represent, there's athletes on COC, then there's athletes on Athletes Can, and there's athletes on their own boards, and then there's athletes at the international level, and none of them are talking to each other. And I just found out that we're working on the same project that you guys are working on, and they're working on the same project that the IOC Athlete Commission is working on, and we're just we're recreating the wheel, and there's no sort of online hub. And anyways, I think that it's easy to do, and we just need to convince people to buy into it.
Can I just comment on that? One of the purposes of the 4 appointed positions, so the Canadian Olympic Committee, Canadian Paralympic Committee, the Aboriginal Sports Circle, and Commonwealth Games Canada, is to ensure that some of that sharing of the athlete initiatives is happening. So whether it's the internal councils within those 4 organizations or the greater population of Athletes Can, that we are working together. So if it's not happening effectively, that's something to address. Hopefully some of those mechanisms are in place to make sure it can happen. But that's a really good point.
So, and actually to touch on that, talking about international athlete or councils, it'd be good to something to follow up on offline after this.
And we have had some sharing internationally as well. We've had guests come from other international kind of athletes groups to learn in part and then to share sort of what they're doing. So there is the beginning phases of that, but work to continue for sure.
Okay, just a couple of things I just wanted to talk to, I guess, with swimming. For example, I think a lot of times that if you're not getting like the responses back from your athletes when you're surveying them, then that speaks to me like a bigger problem of that disengagement between the athlete rep and the athletes themselves. And while I do think it's good if you tap into a couple of athletes and see like, well, what was your thoughts on this team that you're at? I kind of still think that that's still like setting like a lower bar. And I think like this forum is about being engaged with our athletes. And I think it is possible. When I was athlete rep with Athletics Canada, I'd try and survey and get back with the athletes. And I was told by our NSO, like, good luck with that. You're not going to get any athletes responding. So I'd always try and make a goal of having at least 70% response to our surveys so that when I came to the board, I could say, well, we surveyed 70%, or we surveyed all these athletes that were at this team or a part of this, and we had at least 70% or 80% response. So then our board would then be like, oh, well, then let's listen up to what you said. So I think if there is a way to do it, there's different ways. One would I just like pester like athletes, whether it was on the phone, I'd call them up. And like track's not really different from a lot of sports because we have athletes who are training like internationally or across Canada. And so picking up the phone, calling them, okay, I need you to fill out this survey, or just like bombarding them and keep on them with it. Eventually they will respond. And just figuring out the mechanisms. You've got like Facebook and Twitter and all those different social networks to be engaged with your athletes. But as an athlete rep, I really feel it's your responsibility to like figure out a way to be engaged with your athletes. And it usually might be a very difficult barrier in the beginning, but if you can move forward with it, you can have really fruitful or productive results with that. And finally, with the Athlete Council, I think it was kind of touched on a little bit with starting it. I started one with Athletics Canada. I'm not sure what Jared and Hillary's done so far with it. But if you want to ask me how you go about starting it where there is none in existence, and then having your NSO support like an athlete council and how you get it off the ground, I'm available all weekend, so that's it. As well as Eric.
So, go ahead. Maybe take one last, with 5 minutes, one last question.
It will be short.
No problem, it's great.
I don't know if you're going to hear me. Okay, thank you. Is the talent short?
Non, it's pas.
My name is Hélène Allard, wheelchair basketball fauteuil roulant. I don't know how it's really different from one organization to another, but we got a lot of help from our NSO. And I know we discuss about survey, like on the internet. There are some that are free and other that are not, the program. And one good thing about it, like we use it after, let's say, the Worlds, and we evaluate the coaches and what are their strengths, weaknesses, accommodation. It can go, like, you probably know about that. But the good thing is that it's anonymous. Because sometimes you want to say something, say, oh, but if they know that I said that, blah, 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 maybe I will be disadvantaged, you know. So I think to have it anonymous also is a good thing that you might consider.
I think it's a great point. Et une des choses en faisant ce rapport-là, c'est pas seulement une personne qui écrit le rapport. Quand on le soumet, c'est les noms de toutes les personnes qui sont impliquées là-dedans. Et c'est aussi, ça vient pas de le chair uniquement, ça vient de le conseil d'athlète. Mais l'idée d'avoir un survey qui est en anonymité, je pense que c'est une excellente idée, et c'est peut-être, for us to provide a survey that, here's what other sports are doing as a survey, and maybe just putting that in your hands would be an excellent suggestion for a tool. Alors, s'il n'y a pas des autres questions ou commentaires au moment, je pense qu'on va aller à la prochaine. Merci beaucoup.
So we're going to just quickly wrap up here. Just a quick comment. Diving is an example of a sport that has a really long track record of athlete representation, and things like they would bring their new athlete rep and mentor, and over the years we've seen that, and athletes have continued to come through the system. In other cases, it's come through kind of provincial bodies. So there was a time when the Manitoba Athletes Association was alive and strong. I don't know if it still is, but it was. And so two former presidents, Suzanne Dandeneau and Mike Smith both came up through that process of a provincial athletes association. And then BC Voice is another example. So there are, in addition to sport-specific athletes councils, some Canadian sports centres have also come up with ways of having councils provincially. So there's any number of ways that we can share across sports as well as within our sport. Finally, just want to talk really briefly about the dynamic tension that we want to bring to the system. And so whether, it's true, sometimes when you're wanting to communicate your feedback, some people are very confident to do it in a public sort of way, and other people, either because they just don't tend to be public or because there are concerns about repercussions of what they might say, anonymity is really important. So it's really understanding sort of that, those things at play. But our feedback has to be part of that dynamic tension in the system. And so there's a fine line between being able to be empowered, enthusiastic, even bordering on intense, but committed to excellence. And we are committed, and we expect our systems to be committed to that same sense of excellence. So we're trying to raise the bar in terms of our accountability. Contributing to that dynamic tension, it's not, so there's an expression about biting the hand that feeds you. We need to wipe that out of our mentality. It's really important that when we come with the evidence, when we can say 70 to 80% of our athletes say this, how do we know? Because we've talked to them or we've corresponded with them. When we come with evidence-based information, so whether it's the latest research, what our athletes are saying, trends in sport, nationally or internationally, we strengthen our arguments and we become very credible advocates for sport. So I just want to say finally that we are really contributing to progress. And there's ebb and flow. We make progress, we step back. We make progress, the battle is never over. We need to come to it with a position of gratitude for the benefits that we've been given through our life in sport. We know we want to make it better, but, and Eric talked about it briefly, we do need to express appreciation when things go well, when we're listened to, when our ideas are accepted, because everybody needs to know that we're moving in the same direction, we're finding the common ground. So remember to, when possible, yes, provide the dynamic tension, but also be sure to have expressions of gratitude or to come to it with an intentionality and a sincerity and integrity. So I guess I would just like to end. My grandmother talked about having patience and perseverance, and I would say those are two qualities that as athlete reps, you really need to master. Patience and perseverance, and we will get the job done. I want to thank you for your attention this morning, and we're going to take a break, and we'll be coming back very shortly. We've got about a 15-minute break, is that right? We need to reconvene in here no later than 11 o'clock. Thank you.
And just before you guys go, we do have our partners from the investors group out there who obviously are huge supporters. They're here, they want to meet athletes, speak to athletes that they're supporting, and meet athletes and start building relationships with athletes they might support in the future. Also, True Sports out there if you want to speak to them about people of influence. And I just want to thank Lori. Lori's amazing every year, and I'm sure she wants another gift with that Athletes Canada logo on it because she doesn't have any yet. But thank you very much, Lori. This organization would not be the same without her, so thank you.